My name is Connor Mitchell, and at 32 years old, I watched my entire future collapse when my parents announced they were giving my $10 million inheritance to my sister Ashley. I was the grandson of billionaire Maxwell Mitchell, raised with the promise of continuing his legacy. But that day, after the will reading, my mother screamed at me to leave empty-handed. And when I refused, my father dragged me out by my hair. Before the door slammed, I warned them they'd regret it. Before I tell you how I took back what was rightfully mine, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by the people who should have protected you. Growing up as a Mitchell meant living in the shadow of greatness. My grandfather Maxwell wasn't born into wealth. He created an empire from nothing but determination and brilliant innovation. Starting in his garage with nothing but a soldering iron and a vision, he built Mitchell Technologies into a Fortune 500 company over 40 years. His story was legendary in our family and beyond, the ultimate American dream of a poor kid from Nebraska becoming a tech billionaire through sheer grit and genius. While the world saw our family as the picture of success, the reality behind our mansion's walls told a different story. My parents, Richard and Margaret Mitchell, were more interested in the trappings of wealth than the work ethic that created it. My father joined the company straight out of college, handed a vice presidency by my grandfather, and my mother dedicated herself to climbing the social ladder of Greenwich, Connecticut, where our family estate sprawled across 12 manicured acres. From my earliest memories, I was a disappointment to them. Not athletic enough for my father, not socially graceful enough for my mother. Meanwhile, my sister Ashley, 3 years younger than me, became their pride and joy despite, or perhaps because of, her rebellious nature and magnetic charisma. "Connor, stand up straight," my mother would hiss at charity galas. "Try to look like you belong here. The boy needs boarding school," my father would declare after I'd rather read than join their golf outings. "He's too soft." What they never understood was that I wasn't uninterested in the family business. I was studying it, absorbing everything, but in my own way. While they focused on appearances, I focused on substance. It was my grandfather who noticed. When I was 15, he found me in his home office at midnight, poring over quarterly reports I'd snuck from his briefcase. "What do you think about the expansion into Southeast Asia?" he asked, not angry but curious, settling into his leather chair instead of sending me to bed. That began our real relationship. While my parents showcased Ashley at their social events, Grandfather Maxwell quietly took me under his wing. Saturday mornings in his office became our tradition. He taught me to read beyond the numbers, to understand the human elements of business, and most importantly, to value integrity over profit. "The Mitchell name means something," he'd say, tapping financial statements with his weathered finger. "Not because of the money, but because we've never sacrificed our principles to get it." By the time I graduated from Wharton with my MBA, I had a deeper understanding of Mitchell Technologies than anyone except my grandfather. Meanwhile, Ashley had been kicked out of 3 prestigious universities, each time rescued by my parents who covered up her scandals with generous donations. I started at the company in product development, refusing my grandfather's offer of a management position. "I need to earn it," I told him, and the pride in his eyes confirmed it was the right decision. Within 5 years I had worked my way to leading our emerging technologies division, launching 2 successful product lines that expanded our market share by 16%. My personal life remained modest despite access to the family fortune. I lived in a comfortable but unassuming apartment in the city, drove a practical car, and invested most of my salary. My parents saw this as further proof of my inadequacy. A real Mitchell should flaunt their success, in their view. "You live like a middle manager," my mother complained during one holiday dinner. "People are starting to talk." "Let them talk," I replied, which earned a rare smile from my grandfather across the table. As grandfather entered his 80s, his health began to decline. First came the heart attack that he downplayed as a little cardiac hiccup. Then the cancer diagnosis he faced with typical stoicism. While my parents and sister maintained their social calendars with minimal disruptions to visit him, I shifted to working remotely 3 days a week to be at his estate. Those final months changed me. Between managing business calls and reviewing contracts, I sat beside his bed as he drifted in and out of lucidity, soaking in his stories and wisdom. Sometimes he'd grip my hand with surprising strength and say cryptic things. "The true inheritance isn't in the vaults, Connor," he told me once. "Remember that when the time comes." Another day. More alert and serious. "There are sharks circling, even in family waters. Keep your eyes open and your mind sharp." I attributed these warnings to medication and declining health, focusing instead on making him comfortable. The night before he died, however, he was perfectly clear. "I've made provisions," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Trust Theodore when the time comes. He knows everything." I assumed he meant Theodore Franklin, his personal attorney for over 30 years, but before I could ask for clarification, he drifted to sleep. By morning, Maxwell Mitchell, titan of industry and the only family member who truly believed in me, was gone. The funeral was everything you'd expect for a billionaire industrialist: elaborate floral arrangements, politicians and celebrities offering condolences, business rivals paying respects with calculated sincerity. I stood stoically beside my parents and sister as hundreds filed past, many stopping to share how my grandfather had impacted their lives. "He always spoke so highly of you," whispered Janet Wong, his longtime executive assistant. She pressed something into my palm, a small key, before moving along. I slipped it into my pocket, confused but instinctively knowing to keep it private. 5 days later, we gathered in Theodore Franklin's office for the reading of the will. The room was furnished with old-world elegance: leather chairs, mahogany bookshelves, and oil paintings that had witnessed decades of Mitchell family business. Theodore, silver-haired and solemn in an impeccable suit, nodded respectfully as we took our seats. "Maxwell was very specific about his wishes," he began, adjusting his reading glasses. "I'll proceed with the formal reading now." The first hour was predictable. Substantial donations to educational institutions, hospitals, and research foundations. Generous bequests to loyal employees. Specific items of sentimental value to old friends. My mother fidgeted impatiently, while my father checked his watch repeatedly. Ashley texted continuously, barely looking up. Then came the family distributions. My mother received the art collection she'd always coveted. My father got the vacation properties and the classic car collection. Ashley was gifted the family's historic Manhattan penthouse and a trust fund of $5 million. When Theodore reached my name, I sat up straighter, feeling an unexpected tightness in my chest. "To my grandson, Connor Mitchell, I leave a trust fund of $10 million to be held in trust by his parents until such time as they deem him ready to manage such resources responsibly." The room went silent. I stared at Theodore, certain I'd misheard. My grandfather would never have put my parents in control of my inheritance. He knew better than anyone how they undermined me at every turn. Before I could speak, my father cleared his throat. "As executors of this portion of the will, Margaret and I have already made our decision." His voice carried the smug authority I'd heard countless times growing up. "Connor has consistently demonstrated poor judgment and lack of Mitchell ambition. We've decided to redirect his inheritance to Ashley, who has shown true Mitchell spirit and initiative." My sister's head snapped up from her phone, her expression shifting from boredom to triumphant glee. "You can't do that," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Actually, they can," Theodore interjected, his tone professionally neutral but his eyes communicating something I couldn't quite read. "The will gives them discretionary control. This is what Dad wanted." My mother added with artificial sympathy, "He knew you'd squander it on your modest lifestyle and cautious investments." The sheer absurdity of her statement might have made me laugh if the betrayal hadn't cut so deep. My grandfather had spent years teaching me responsible wealth management, while watching my sister burn through money like kindling. Grandfather would never have intended this, I argued, turning to Theodore. There must be some mistake. The language is quite clear, Theodore replied, avoiding my gaze now. I'm sorry, Connor. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. I vaguely registered additional details about company voting shares going into a complex trust structure, but my mind was reeling from the personal betrayal. When the meeting concluded, I confronted my parents in the parking lot. Why? I demanded. Why would you do this? My father straightened his Italian silk tie. Because you've never been a true Mitchell. Your grandfather coddled you, but we've always seen you clearly. You've been a disappointment from day one. My mother added, adjusting her designer sunglasses. Always in the corners at parties. Working your way up like some common employee instead of taking your rightful place. My rightful place? I echoed, incredulous. You mean the one you handed to Ashley despite her never working a day in her life? Ashley smirked, twirling her car keys. Don't be bitter, Connor. It's not attractive. We expect you out of the guest house by tomorrow, my father said coldly. Now that your grandfather is gone, there's no reason for you to remain on family property. I drove home in a daze, the reality of my situation sinking in with each passing mile. The guest house on my grandfather's estate had been my home for the past year while I helped with his care. Now, I was being exiled. That evening, I methodically packed my belongings, still numb from shock. The guest house phone rang, the main house calling. Don't forget to leave the Rolex, my mother said without preamble. It was a family gift, not a personal one. The watch had been my grandfather's 18th birthday present to me, inscribed with his favorite motto, integrity before profit. The demand broke something inside me. The next morning, my parents and sister arrived to supervise my departure. As I carried my suitcase toward the door, my mother's voice sliced through the air. You're not taking anything from here. Hand over that bag. I turned slowly. These are my personal possessions. Nothing in this house is yours, my father countered. Everything belongs to the Mitchell family, a family you've proven unworthy of. When I continued toward the door, my father lunged forward with unexpected speed for a man in his 60s. He grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head back with such force that I dropped my bag. Your grandfather isn't here to protect you anymore, he hissed, dragging me toward the door while my mother and sister watched impassively. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation as he shoved me onto the gravel driveway. My suitcase followed, splitting open and spilling my life across the stones. I gathered my dignity along with my scattered belongings, stood tall, and looked each of them in the eye. You'll regret this, I said quietly. I promise you will live to regret this day more than any other in your lives. My mother laughed. Empty threats from an empty man. They returned to the main house without a backward glance, leaving me standing alone with nothing but a damaged suitcase, the clothes on my back, my wallet, and my phone. That night, I checked into the Lakeside Motel, a dingy establishment on the outskirts of town that charged by the week. Room 118 became my new home, stained carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, and a mattress that sagged in the middle. The contrast with the Mitchell estate couldn't have been starker. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers through my hair where my father had grabbed it, wincing at the tender spots on my scalp. The physical pain was subsiding, but the emotional wound felt like it was still actively bleeding. My entire identity had been built around being Maxwell Mitchell's grandson and eventual successor. Now that foundation had been ripped away. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Mitchell Technologies announces transition plan following founder's death. I opened the article to find a company press release quoting my father as the new interim CEO, with Ashley named as Chief Brand Officer, a position created specifically for her despite her complete lack of qualifications. I tried calling James Cooper, My closest friend since college and a fellow executive at Mitchell Technologies. The call went straight to voicemail. Same with the next 3 colleagues I tried. By the 4th call, I understood what was happening. A text from James confirmed it. Sorry, man, word came down that anyone associating with you will be terminated. Ashley's saying you had a breakdown and threatened the family. Need my job. Good luck. I laughed bitterly. Of course, Ashley had already poisoned the well. She'd always been masterful at reshaping narratives to her advantage, a skill honed through years of talking her way out of scandals. The next morning, I discovered my company email had been deactivated and my bank accounts frozen pending investigation of financial irregularities. Another baseless accusation designed to isolate me completely. For 3 days, I barely left the motel room, surviving on vending machine snacks and trying to make sense of what had happened. On the 4th day, while emptying my wallet to count my dwindling cash, a business card fell out, Theodore Franklin's card, with his personal cell number handwritten on the back. I vaguely remembered my grandfather insisting I take it months ago. I hesitated before dialing. Theodore had seemed unwilling to help at the will reading. But he was also my grandfather's most trusted advisor for decades. The call connected on the 3rd ring. I'd been waiting for your call, Theodore said, skipping any greeting. Not over the phone. Meet me at Riverside Park, the bench near the old lighthouse. 1 hour. The park was deserted when I arrived, autumn leaves swirling across empty walkways. Theodore sat alone on the designated bench, looking older than he had at the office. You're not surprised by what happened? I said, sitting beside him. No, he admitted. Your grandfather wasn't either. He knew your parents better than you think. I stared at him. Then why did he leave me at their mercy? Theodore reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. He didn't. This is for you, to be delivered only if your parents did exactly what he predicted they would do. The envelope contained a letter in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Connor, if you're reading this, then Richard and Margaret have shown their true colors. I apologize for the pain this has caused you, but it was necessary to expose them completely before we proceed. The will they heard was not my only will. Theodore has maintained a second, legally binding document that will supersede the first under specific conditions that your parents have now met. There's a safe deposit box at First National Bank, accessible with the key Janet gave you. Inside is everything you need. This is not just about money, Connor. It's about legacy and truth. I'm trusting you to handle both with the integrity you've always shown. With faith in you, grandfather. I looked up at Theodore, stunned. A second will? Maxwell was a chess player, Theodore said with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. He was always 3 moves ahead. Your parents and sister just made exactly the move he anticipated. Why the elaborate setup? Why put me through this? 2 reasons, Theodore explained. First, he needed documented proof of their true intentions. Second, and more importantly, he needed to be certain about you. Certain about what? That you wouldn't be corrupted by guaranteed wealth and power. That when pushed to your limits, your character would hold. It was extreme, I argued against it. But Maxwell was adamant. The next morning, I stood in a private room at First National Bank, the contents of the safe deposit box spread before me. Inside I'd found USB drives, notarized documents, financial records, and a second letter from my grandfather. Connor, the drives contain evidence of financial improprieties committed by your father over the past decade, embezzlement, tax fraud, and misappropriation of company funds. Your mother was aware and complicit. Ashley has been helping cover their tracks for the past 3 years in exchange for their continued financial support of her lifestyle. I've been gathering this evidence since I first discovered discrepancies 5 years ago. I could have exposed them then, but family is complicated. I wanted to give them a chance to redeem themselves. They failed that test repeatedly. The second will returns control of Mitchell Technologies to you through majority voting shares currently held in a blind trust. Theodore will guide you through the legal process. Remember, in business as in life, integrity before profit. Grandfather. I sat back, overwhelmed by both the revelation and the responsibility. My grandfather had entrusted me not just with his fortune, but with his legacy. The path forward was clear but daunting. Theodore watched me carefully. What will you do now? I gathered the documents methodically, my mind already formulating a plan. Exactly what my grandfather prepared me to do. Take back what's mine and restore the Mitchell name to what it should stand for. The following weeks transformed me. I moved from the lakeside motel to a modest apartment paid for in cash, using a small emergency fund I'd maintained separate from my main accounts. I grew a beard, started wearing glasses, and kept a low profile. It wasn't just about avoiding recognition, it was about becoming someone new, someone tempered by betrayal. Theodore became my guide through the complex legal landscape we were navigating. We met in out-of-the-way diners and park benches, never the same location twice. The secret will is ironclad, he assured me, but executing it requires precise timing and evidence. Your grandfather stipulated that it would only activate if your parents violated their fiduciary duty to both you and the company. The USB drives contained years of meticulously documented financial transactions. My father had been siphoning company funds through shell corporations, while my mother had orchestrated tax schemes involving falsely valued charitable donations. Ashley's role had evolved from unwitting beneficiary to active participant, using her charm to distract board members from asking too many questions. How did he get all this? I asked Theodore, amazed at the thoroughness of the evidence. Janet, he replied simply. She's been your grandfather's eyes and ears for decades. Nothing happened at Mitchell Technologies without her knowledge. I needed allies beyond Theodore and Janet. My grandfather's letter had mentioned several board members and executives who might remain loyal to his vision. The first was Victor Ramirez, who had been my grandfather's right-hand man for over 20 years before my father sidelined him to an advisory role. Our meeting in a small coastal town 40 miles away was tense at first. Victor studied me carefully, looking for something in my expression. You have his eyes, he finally said. Not the color, the way they see through the noise to what matters. I need your help. I told him plainly. To honor what my grandfather built. Victor nodded once. Tell me the plan. Gradually, I assembled a small but powerful coalition. Victor brought in Diane Kwan from the finance department, who had been quietly documenting additional discrepancies. Theodore connected me with 2 board members who had privately expressed concerns about the company's new direction. Janet continued providing inside information while maintaining her position as my father's assistant. Meanwhile, my parents were running Mitchell Technologies into the ground. My father made impulsive acquisitions to boost short-term stock prices while gutting R&D. My mother turned company charity events into social climbing opportunities with minimal actual charitable impact. Ashley, as chief brand officer, spent millions on glamorous but ineffective marketing campaigns featuring herself. I worked 18-hour days from my Spartan apartment, analyzing financial records, preparing legal briefs with Theodore, and developing a comprehensive plan to revitalize the company post-takeover. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I would read my grandfather's letters again, drawing strength from his faith in me. There were moments of doubt and weakness. One night, after discovering my parents had liquidated a promising research division to fund a vanity project for Ashley, I nearly called them to propose a truce. I even dialed half the number before hanging up. Disgusted with my momentary weakness. Your grandfather wavered too, Theodore told me when I confessed this lapse. Family ties are powerful. He understood the temptation to forgive, even when forgiveness isn't earned. 4 months into our clandestine campaign, we suffered a setback. One of our allied board members, Harold Jenkins, died unexpectedly of a heart attack. My father quickly appointed a loyal friend to fill the vacancy, potentially jeopardizing our narrow majority. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Victor urged during an emergency meeting in my apartment. "Richard is consolidating power faster than anticipated." "We're not ready," I argued. "The forensic accounting on the offshore accounts isn't complete." Janet, who rarely spoke during these strategy sessions, cleared her throat. "There's something else you should know. They're planning to take the company private. Richard has been meeting with private equity firms. If that happens, the board structure changes completely." That night, alone in my apartment, I faced the hardest decision yet. Moving too soon risked failure, but waiting too long guaranteed it. I pulled out the photograph of my grandfather that I kept on my nightstand, not a formal portrait, but a candid shot of him teaching me to fish when I was 10. "What would you do?" I asked the image, feeling both foolish and desperate. The answer came not in words but in memory, my grandfather calmly rebaiting my hook after I'd lost an impressive catch, saying, "Sometimes you have to let something go to get something better." I called Theodore at midnight. "We move in 2 weeks. Tell everyone." The plan crystallized with startling clarity. We would use the upcoming quarterly board meeting, the same meeting where my father planned to announce the privatization exploration, to spring our trap. Every detail was choreographed. Every contingency anticipated. In the final days before the confrontation, I barely slept. I reviewed documents until the numbers blurred, rehearsed my presentation until I could recite it from memory, and steeled myself for the inevitable personal cost of what I was about to do. This wasn't just business, it was the final severance of whatever family bonds remained. The night before the board meeting, I stood before the mirror in my bathroom, shaving off the beard I'd grown as disguise. Stroke by stroke, I revealed the face I'd inherited from my grandfather, the strong jawline and determined eyes that had always made my parentage unmistakable. "Tomorrow," I told my reflection, "we find out what I'm really made of." The Mitchell Technologies headquarters dominated the Manhattan skyline. 60 floors of glass and steel crowned with our distinctive M logo illuminated day and night. I hadn't set foot in the building since my grandfather's death, and now I approached it as both an outsider and its rightful heir. I entered through a service entrance, where Janet waited with a security badge and the day's schedule. Her normally impassive face showed a flicker of approval at my appearance, clean-shaven, hair precisely cut, wearing one of my grandfather's suits that she had secretly preserved for me. "The board members are gathering in the executive dining room before the meeting," she informed me. "Your parents and sister are running late. Your mother insisted on a breakfast interview with Forbes about the Mitchell women shaping industry's future." "Perfect," I replied. Those extra minutes were crucial to our plan. Victor met me in a small conference room we designated as our staging area. The tension in his body was visible, but his voice remained steady as he updated me. "All our allies are in position. Theodore has the legal documents prepared. Diane has the financial presentation ready." He hesitated before adding, "Your father invited Princeton partners to observe the meeting. They're the private equity firm he's favoring for the takeover. This unexpected complication could work in our favor, additional witnesses to whatever unfolded." At precisely 9:45 a.m., I entered the executive dining room where board members mingled over coffee. The conversation died instantly, faces registering shock at my appearance. "Connor," stammered Walter Green, a longtime board member and my father's golf partner. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," I replied calmly, accepting a coffee from a wide-eyed server. "I'm looking forward to an illuminating meeting." Theodore arrived moments later, nodding imperceptibly to confirm all was in order. By the time we moved to the boardroom, the atmosphere crackled with tension and confusion. I took a seat not at the table but against the wall, a strategic choice to observe reactions. At 10:02 a.m., my parents and Ashley swept into the room in a cloud of expensive perfume and entitlement. My father was mid-sentence, briefing my mother about the Princeton Partners representatives when he spotted me. He froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What is he doing here?" he demanded, recovering quickly. "Security." "I invited him," said board member Eleanor Winters, one of our allies. "As a Mitchell and former executive, he has valuable perspective on today's agenda items. He has no position here anymore." My mother hissed, her social mask slipping to reveal the coldness beneath. "Let him stay," Ashley interjected with false magnanimity. "He can witness firsthand the exciting new direction of Mitchell Technologies." The smirk she directed at me conveyed what she left unsaid. Let him see what he lost. My father, ever conscious of appearances, especially before the Princeton Partners representatives, forced a tight smile. "Fine. As a non-voting observer only." The meeting began with standard procedures: approval of prior minutes, departmental updates, financial summaries. I remained silent, watching my father grow increasingly confident as his moment approached. When the agenda reached strategic initiatives, he stood with practiced authority. "Before we discuss the privatization opportunity I've been exploring, I'd like to announce several executive changes. Effective immediately. Ashley will be elevated to Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, and Margaret will chair our newly formed Mitchell Foundation, overseeing all philanthropic activities." Board members nodded dutifully. Most were either my father's appointees or too cowed to object. This was the moment we'd anticipated. Theodore cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with those appointments, there's a legal matter requiring immediate attention." My father frowned. "Any legal matters should come through our general counsel, who isn't present today. This concerns fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and can't wait." Theodore continued, opening his briefcase. "I've been instructed to present evidence of significant financial improprieties involving current management." The room went silent as Theodore distributed folders to each board member. My father's face darkened, but he maintained composure. "Whatever this is, it's inappropriate for an open meeting with outside observers present," he said, glancing nervously at the Princeton Partners representatives. I stood then, moving to the front of the room. "Actually, transparency is exactly what's needed. For too long, Mitchell Technologies has operated under a veil of deception. My father's practiced charm vanished. You have no standing here, Connor." "This is pathetic," a disgruntled former employee making baseless accusations. "The accusations are far from baseless," I replied, nodding to Diane Kwan, who connected her laptop to the room's projection system. "And I have more standing than you realize." For the next 20 minutes, we methodically presented the evidence my grandfather had accumulated, supplemented by Diane's forensic accounting. Shell companies, falsified expense reports, diverted research funds, tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. My father attempted interruptions, but each objection was met with another damning document. My mother maintained stony silence, while Ashley's expression cycled between disbelief, anger, and finally, calculation. When the financial presentation concluded, Theodore took center stage again. "In light of these revelations, I am legally obligated to introduce a previously sealed document, the true last will and testament of Maxwell Mitchell, which supersedes the will read previously based on triggers that have now been activated." He read the key provisions: majority voting control of Mitchell Technologies transferred immediately to me, my parents and sister removed from all company positions, restitution required for misappropriated funds. "This is preposterous," my father sputtered. "The will was executed months ago." "This will was executed first, with contingencies," Theodore explained. "Your actions activated those contingencies. Everything has been properly notarized and witnessed." The Princeton Partners representatives exchanged glances and quietly excused themselves, effectively ending any privatization hope. My father, desperate now, turned to the board members he considered loyal. "This is clearly a forgery. We'll contest this immediately." "I wouldn't recommend that," I said calmly. "The evidence of financial crimes would become public record in any court proceeding. As it stands, there's an opportunity to handle this as an internal corporate matter." I let that sink in, the implicit choice between public scandal and a managed transition. Ashley, always quick to assess changing winds, stood suddenly. "I had no knowledge of any financial irregularities," she declared. "I was brought into my role recently and focused solely on brand management. If improprieties occurred, I was kept in the dark." The betrayal was so swift and complete that my mother gasped. "Ashley, you knew exactly." "Knew what, Mother?" Ashley interrupted with wide-eyed innocence. "You and Dad handled all financial matters. I trusted you completely." She turned to the board. "I'm shocked and disappointed to learn about these allegations." In that moment, seeing my sister abandon our parents to save herself, I felt an unexpected twinge of pity for them. They had raised her to prioritize self-interest above all else. And now they were experiencing the logical conclusion of those lessons. The board voted unanimously to implement the provisions of the True Will and launch a full investigation. My parents were escorted from the building by security, my mother weeping silently while my father threatened lawsuits against everyone present. Ashley lingered, approaching me with a conciliatory smile once we were alone in the boardroom. "Connor, I hope we can move forward positively. Families should stick together through difficult times." I studied her, seeing both the sister I'd grown up with and the stranger she'd become. "You have an interesting definition of family loyalty, considering what just happened." "I was only protecting myself," she said with surprising candor. "You'd have done the same." "No," I replied. "I wouldn't have. That's the difference between us. Always has been." As she turned to leave, I added, "I'll have security clear out your office. Your severance details will come through Theodore." Her smile vanished. "You're firing me? After I supported you against them?" "You didn't support me. You abandoned them when it became convenient. There's a difference." I gathered my documents, suddenly exhausted. "Goodbye, Ashley." Alone in the boardroom, I sat in my grandfather's old chair at the head of the table, running my fingers over the polished mahogany where his hands had rested for decades. The victory felt hollow in the moment, not because I regretted my actions, but because the cost had been even higher than I'd anticipated. Theodore returned, closing the door softly behind him. "The board has authorized a press release announcing your appointment as CEO, effective immediately. Congratulations." I nodded, still processing the day's events. "What happens to them now?" "Your parents? Legally, they could face criminal charges. The board is inclined to pursue that path given the scale of the fraud." I thought about my father dragging me by my hair, my mother watching coldly, years of their casual cruelty and disappointment. Justice demanded consequences. Yet something in me hesitated at pushing them into public disgrace and possibly prison. "Let me think about alternatives," I said finally. "There might be a way to ensure restitution without destroying what's left of the Mitchell name." Theodore studied me with something like pride. "Your grandfather said you'd respond exactly this way. Tough but not vindictive, were his words." For the first time that day, I smiled genuinely. "He knew me well. Better than you realize," Theodore replied. He left one more thing for this moment. He handed me an envelope, this one marked simply, "After." Inside was a single page with just a few lines in my grandfather's handwriting. "The true measure of a man isn't how he treats his enemies, but how he handles victory. Remember that the Mitchell legacy isn't in our name on buildings, but in the integrity of our choices. I am proud of you, Connor. You've earned not just this company, but my complete faith in what you'll do with it." The following months were a whirlwind of activity as I took control of Mitchell Technologies. The company had suffered under my parents' leadership. Stock prices had fallen 15%. Key talent had departed, and several major clients were considering taking their business elsewhere. Restoring stability became my immediate priority. My first official act was establishing the Maxwell Mitchell Foundation for Innovation and Ethics, endowed with $20 million from company profits. The foundation would fund scholarships for underprivileged students interested in technology and business, with a curriculum emphasizing both technical skills and ethical leadership. "Your grandfather would have loved this," Janet told me as we finalized the foundation's charter. She had accepted my offer to become chief of staff, bringing her organizational genius and institutional knowledge to my executive team. "It feels right," I replied, "making something positive from all this." The more difficult decisions involved my family. After consultation with the board and our legal team, I proposed a settlement. My parents would repay all misappropriated funds, sell their luxury properties to cover the restitution, and sign binding agreements never to serve as officers or directors of any public company again. In exchange, Mitchell Technologies would not pursue criminal charges. "Are you sure about this?" Victor asked when I presented the plan. "What they did deserves more severe consequences." "I'm not doing it for them," I explained. "Criminal proceedings would damage the company further and distract from rebuilding. This way, we get clean closure and can move forward." My parents accepted the terms with little choice. The evidence against them was overwhelming. They relocated to a modest house in Arizona, socially ostracized from the circles they'd once dominated. My father, stripped of the power and prestige that had defined him, seemed to age 10 years overnight. My mother withdrew from public life entirely. Her social media accounts suddenly silent after years of constant status displays. Ashley proved more complicated. Unlike our parents, she hadn't directly embezzled funds, though she benefited from and helped conceal their actions. After several sleepless nights weighing options, I offered her a choice: leave with a modest severance and clean reference, or earn her way back through legitimate work. "What does earn her way back mean exactly?" she asked suspiciously when we met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between the Mitchell offices and her newly rented apartment, her penthouse having been sold as part of the restitution. "Starting at entry level in product marketing. Regular performance reviews. No special treatment. Standard salary." I watched her face as the implications sank in. "You'd have to actually work, Ashley. No shortcuts." She laughed bitterly. "Why would you even offer this? You could just cut me off completely. Because despite everything, you're still my sister. And you're smart, actually smart, not just socially clever. That talent could be valuable if it were channeled properly." "Under your supervision, you mean? With you as the boss?" "Yes," I acknowledged. "Those are the terms. Take them or leave them." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I'll think about it." To my surprise, she accepted the offer 2 days later. The adjustment wasn't smooth. She bristled at taking direction, complained about early meetings, and initially treated her position as beneath her. But gradually, something changed. Maybe it was seeing her ideas implemented and credited properly, or experiencing the satisfaction of earning recognition rather than demanding it. Whatever the catalyst, 6 months into her new role, she was working harder than anyone in her department. The Mitchell Technologies resurrection became a business school case study as we stabilized and revitalized the company. We refocused on innovation, rehired key departed talent, and recommitted to the ethical standards my grandfather had established. By the end of the first year under my leadership, our stock had not only recovered but reached new highs. Media coverage was initially intense. The dramatic boardroom confrontation had leaked despite our best efforts at discretion. Business publications ran profiles with headlines like "Mitchell Family Drama, Corporate Edition," and "Prodigal Son Returns to Save Family Empire." I declined all interview requests, focusing instead on rebuilding relationships with clients, employees, and investors through direct engagement. Reconnecting with my grandfather's old friends and business associates proved particularly rewarding. These titans of industry had respected Maxwell Mitchell not just for his success but for his character. Their stories revealed dimensions of him I hadn't fully appreciated: his quiet philanthropy, his mentorship of struggling entrepreneurs, his unwavering ethical standards even when they cost him financially. "He saw something special in you from the beginning," Harold Winters, his oldest friend, told me over dinner. "Even when you were a serious little boy trailing behind him at company picnics, he'd tell me that one understands what matters." These conversations helped me process my grief, which had been overshadowed by the inheritance battle. I established a memorial garden at company headquarters with a simple stone bench inscribed with his favorite saying: "Integrity before profit." I often took lunch there, sometimes joined by employees who shared their own memories of my grandfather. The personal cost of the past year emerged in quieter moments. Despite professional success, I found myself increasingly isolated. Old friends had chosen sides during the conflict, and new relationships seemed fraught with uncertainty about motives. Did people want to know Connor Mitchell? Or the CEO of Mitchell Technologies? The distinction blurred uncomfortably. My apartment, though now upgraded from the Spartan refuge of my planning days, remained impersonal, more hotel suite than home. I worked 14-hour days, telling myself it was necessary for the company's recovery rather than acknowledging my reluctance to face an empty living space. Ashley, surprisingly, became the one to confront this pattern. "You need a life outside those walls," she said bluntly one evening, stopping by my office well after normal business hours. "You're turning into a corporate ghost." Rich coming from someone I've had to remind twice about working weekends, I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "Different situation. I'm rebuilding a reputation. You're hiding from one." The accuracy of her observation made me pause. "I'm not hiding. When was the last time you did something that wasn't about the company? Or grandfather's legacy? Or proving yourself?" She perched on the edge of my desk. "You won, Connor. But winning doesn't matter if you forget how to live." Her words stayed with me, catalyzing subtle changes. I joined a rowing club, reconnecting with a sport I'd enjoyed in college. I accepted dinner invitations I would have previously declined. I even adopted a rescue dog, a dignified older retriever named Edison, who now accompanied me to the office 3 days a week, becoming an unofficial company mascot. 1 year and 8 months after taking control of Mitchell Technologies, I received an unexpected visitor. Theodore's assistant announced, "A Ms. Rebecca Hamilton to see you, sir." She says she's an old friend of your grandfather's. The woman who entered my office was perhaps 50, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You look just like him," she said without preamble. "It's uncanny." "You knew my grandfather well?" I asked, gesturing for her to sit. "We were colleagues at MIT before he founded Mitchell Technologies. I run Hamilton Biotech now." She studied me carefully. "Maxwell talked about you often. He was determined you'd avoid the entitlement trap that snares most wealthy heirs. Hence the elaborate inheritance test," I said with a wry smile. "Exactly. Tough love on a grand scale." She leaned forward. "I'm here because we had a standing agreement. If you passed his test, I'd propose a joint venture combining your quantum computing expertise with our biological research. The project has enormous potential but requires both trust and technical innovation." The collaboration with Hamilton Biotech became my most challenging and rewarding professional endeavor yet. Rebecca was brilliant, demanding, and refreshingly direct, a contemporary version of my grandfather in many ways. Our working relationship evolved into friendship, and eventually, something more. Though we both moved cautiously given our professional ties. "He would have approved," Janet commented after observing Rebecca and me in deep discussion following a board presentation. "Of the joint venture?" I asked. Janet gave me a knowing look. "Of her. She doesn't care about your last name or your net worth. She challenges you. The observation was accurate. Rebecca saw me clearly, my strengths and flaws, ambitions and insecurities, and engaged with the person rather than the position. With her, I found myself relaxing the vigilant self-control I'd maintained since the inheritance battle, rediscovering aspects of myself beyond being Maxwell Mitchell's grandson or Mitchell Technologies CEO. Ashley's transformation continued as well, surprising everyone including herself. She excelled in product marketing, eventually earning a legitimate promotion to team leader. Our relationship remained complicated, too much history for easy forgiveness, but evolved into a wary professional respect that occasionally revealed glimpses of our childhood connection. "Do you ever hear from them?" she asked during a rare personal conversation, 2 years after the confrontation. "Christmas card last year," I replied. "Generic. No note." She nodded. "Same. Mother called once, asking for money. I declined. Right decision. I know." She hesitated. "Sometimes I wonder if they ever really saw us, or just what they wanted from us." The question lingered between us, either having a satisfying answer. As Mitchell Technologies flourished under stable leadership, I gradually implemented structural changes to ensure its long-term ethical governance. We established an independent ethics committee with real oversight power, reformed executive compensation to discourage short-term profit chasing, and created robust whistleblower protections. "Building guardrails against future versions of your parents?" Theodore observed as we finalized these policies. "Against human nature," I corrected. "Power corrupts subtly. Better to create systems that don't rely solely on individual character." On the 3rd anniversary of taking control, I held a company-wide gathering to unveil a new mission statement and corporate values, explicitly codifying the principles my grandfather had lived by. The event concluded with the dedication of the Maxwell Mitchell Innovation Center, a state-of-the-art research facility where employees could devote 20% of their time to passion projects with potential social impact. Standing at the podium before hundreds of employees, I felt a profound sense of having fulfilled my promise to my grandfather. The Mitchell name once again stood for integrity, innovation, and ethical leadership. The legacy he entrusted to me was secure, not just in buildings or bank accounts, but in the company's culture and contributions. As the applause faded and people mingled at the reception, I slipped away briefly to the memorial garden. Sitting on my grandfather's bench in the fading afternoon light, I imagined what he might say about all that had transpired. "You did well, son," I could almost hear him say. "But remember, legacy isn't static. It's built daily, choice by choice." I nodded to the empty space beside me, acknowledging the truth of this imagined wisdom. The inheritance battle had been just the beginning. The real work of honoring his legacy would be the choices I made every day going forward, as a leader, as a man, and perhaps someday, as a mentor to the next generation. 5 years have passed since that dramatic boardroom confrontation. Mitchell Technologies has not only recovered but thrived beyond my grandfather's most optimistic projections. Our stock value has tripled, our workforce has expanded globally, and our innovations in quantum computing and sustainable technology have positioned us at the forefront of multiple industries. The Maxwell Mitchell Foundation now supports over 500 scholarship students annually, with our first graduating class already making impressive contributions in their fields. We've expanded the Foundation's mission to include ethical leadership institutes at major universities, addressing the critical gap my grandfather often discussed: technical brilliance without moral compass. More meaningful than these measurable successes are the cultural changes within the company. Mitchell Technologies consistently ranks among the best places to work, with employee surveys highlighting our commitment to work-life balance, ethical practices, and meaningful innovation. The ruthless corporate environment my father fostered has been replaced by collaborative excellence and principled ambition. My relationship with Ashley evolved through several phases before reaching its current state of cautious reconciliation. Her initial performance in product marketing eventually earned her a legitimate director position, where she discovered a genuine talent for understanding consumer psychology and market trends. The entitlement that once defined her gradually gave way to earned confidence. "I never actually worked before," she admitted during a rare personal lunch 3 years into her new career path. "I never knew what it felt like to accomplish something on merit alone." "And now?" I asked. "It's addictive," she replied with a self-awareness that would have been unimaginable in the old Ashley. "Better than anything I chased before. While we'll never have the uncomplicated sibling relationship that might have been possible under different circumstances, we've established a functional dynamic based on mutual respect and shared commitment to rehabilitating the Mitchell name." My parents remain distant figures, having chosen continued resentment over reconciliation. They maintain a modest lifestyle in Arizona, supported by the limited allowance established in the settlement agreement. Occasional reports from mutual connections suggest my father spends his days at a local country club, telling increasingly embellished stories about his former business glory, while my mother has become involved with a church group, seeking, perhaps, the acceptance she lost in her previous social circles. I extended olive branches twice, once when my father had a minor heart attack, and again when they became grandparents through Ashley's first child. Both gestures were met with rigid politeness that made clear the wounds remained too deep for meaningful healing. I've accepted this reality without letting it define me, understanding that some bridges, once burned, cannot be fully reconstructed. The most unexpected development in my personal life came through Rebecca Hamilton. Our professional collaboration evolved into friendship, then a relationship that challenged and fulfilled me in ways I hadn't thought possible. 2 years ago, we married in a simple ceremony at my grandfather's favorite fishing cabin, with Janet, Theodore, Victor, and a few close friends as witnesses. Ashley attended with her husband and daughter, her presence a significant step in our ongoing reconciliation. Rebecca and I now balance our respective companies with a shared commitment to using technology for meaningful advancement. Her scientific brilliance combined with my business acumen has resulted in breakthroughs that neither of us could have achieved individually. Our personal partnership operates on the same principles my grandfather championed: mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values. Last month, we welcomed our first child, a daughter named Maxwell Elaine Mitchell Hamilton. Holding her in the hospital, I experienced a profound reconnection with my grandfather's legacy in its most personal form. The values he instilled in me, integrity, resilience, compassion beneath strength, are now mine to pass forward to a new generation. The inheritance battle that once consumed my identity has become simply one chapter in a larger story. The $10 million that catalyzed the conflict seems almost trivial compared to what was truly at stake: the moral foundation of a family legacy, the culture of a company that employs thousands, and my own understanding of what matters most. If there's wisdom I've gained from this journey, it's that true inheritance isn't measured in dollars. Money without values corrupts. Power without purpose destroys. Success without integrity ultimately fails. My grandfather understood these truths and orchestrated an elaborate test not to be cruel, but to ensure I understood them too before taking stewardship of what he'd built. I've learned that family isn't just defined by blood but by those who stand beside you through challenges. People like Theodore, Janet, and Victor, who risked their careers to support what was right. I've learned that redemption is possible even after profound betrayal, as Ashley demonstrated through her willingness to rebuild herself from the ground up. Most importantly, I've learned that while we cannot choose the circumstances we're born into, we have the power to choose our response to them. My parents chose entitlement and deception, paths that led to their downfall. I chose to honor my grandfather's faith in me, a path that led to both professional success and personal fulfillment. Looking toward the future, my focus has shifted from reclaiming what was taken to building something worthy of passing on. Mitchell Technologies continues to evolve under shared leadership that emphasizes innovation with ethical guardrails. The foundation expands its impact globally. And in my personal life, the family legacy takes new form in how I parent, partner, and engage with the wider world. I sometimes wonder what my grandfather would think of how everything unfolded. I believe he would be satisfied with the business outcomes but more concerned with the person I've become through adversity. The test he designed was never really about the money or even the company. It was about developing the character necessary to handle both responsibly. Have you ever faced betrayal from those who should have protected you? How did you respond, with bitterness or determination? The choices we make in our darkest moments truly define us. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of reclaiming what was rightfully mine resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming life's most challenging obstacles. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, true inheritance isn't what's given to you, but what you build with your own hands and heart.